Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live, my friends. How can you be calm, clear, and confident versus fight, flight, and freeze when conflict lands on your life? Come on in and join us today and find out how to flip conflict on its head and take your communication skills to a whole new level. Now, as you tune in today, I'd love to welcome you to Career Coffee Chat. My name is Erin Urban or Coachy Urban, and you find out more about me at coachyurban.com. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel so you're the first to know about all upcoming events and live shows. And you can find me at Coachy Urban on YouTube and also found in the show notes and comments here today. Now, say hi as you join us today. Say where you're from. I want to welcome you to the show and let me know if you've ever had a difficult conversation that you either need to have or had one land on you by surprise. Now, our guest today, Lori-Ann Duguay, is a rock star workplace culture expert, and we're going to be chatting about how to manage conflict in the heat of the moment, what to do to prep for conflict, to find that flow and ease through those difficult conversations, and how to better influence others while still being you. And maybe even conflict might be beneficial, crazy but true. So a little bit about our awesome guest today. Lori-Ann is the CEO and founder of People Powered Solutions, and she helps ignite organizational transformations by shaking up their workplace culture. She's an employee experience and leadership expert, helping organizations attract and retain top talent they need to thrive in the world of work, the new world of work, not just any old world of work, the hashtag future of work, to unleash your team's full potential. So please join me in welcoming Lori-Ann to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We always have a fun conversation. I'm really looking forward to this one because it's a much needed topic.
I agree.
Yeah. So we were chatting a little bit before the show, but I stopped us. I was like, wait. Let's not spoil
Again, we did that last time too, eh?
Right. Because we can do that. But let me know, you're seeing a lot because you're very active in organizations right now, helping them design the optimal cultures that they need to thrive in this quote unquote future of work, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very different world out there. So what are you seeing when it comes to that? And most importantly, leaving on the conflict side, are we seeing more conflict since?
My God, I think there's always been conflict, but I think we've seen certainly an amplification of conflict when you think about what we've just experienced, globally. The pandemic has really made that people are working. They've had to work, crazy hours. They've seen kind of a disappearance of boundaries when it comes to this hybrid work model, right? We've seen all kinds of different shifts that have contributed really to an increase in mental health issues, an increase in stress, an increase in just feeling generally depleted, right? Generally, you got nothing left in your tank, which means that you're less tolerant maybe to certain people, certain personalities. You're more likely to kind of, if you haven't spent any time nurturing that self-care and making sure that you are, keeping your mental health within an optimal state, then you're likely to see the eruption of conflict. And the one thing I want to talk about really quickly is when I teach conflict management to organizations, they say, well, teach us how to avoid conflict. If there's one thing I can ask people to do today is to recognize that, conflict is 100% inevitable. It's going to happen. So as an organization, it's your job to provide the tools and the training to your people to manage and to really navigate conflict and to transform it, as you alluded to in your intro, into a productive event and start to see it. My all-time favorite quote. Have you heard that quote? The illiterate of the 21st generation will not be those of the 21st generation, my Lord, of the 21st century, will not be those who are unable to read and write, but rather those who are unable to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So when I start my sessions, I always tell them, here's your chance to unlearn and relearn how to frame conflict in a more positive light and see it as a constructive exercise.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting we're talking about this because I feel like it's not that conflict itself has become more prevalent in our lives. We have changed.
We have.
So how we're showing up is changing. And before we started the show, Lori-Ann is asking me, oh, well, what are you seeing in your clients? I said, well, honestly, a lot of the time we spend initially is getting people out of survival mode. Because when we're in survival mode, we're not able to take in any more information. We're not able to respond in a cognizant way. We're not able to leverage our beautiful brains in a healthy way. What we're doing is we're responding from a very animalistic side of ourselves, which may or may not support our goals, usually not. So, in order for us to thrive and grow as individuals, as leaders, and work better in teams, addressing that, what some people call well being part of it, is critical because you cannot show up 100% if you are in fight, flight, or freeze.
Just 100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah.
So, what do you do with your groups that you talk to get them to that important first step so they can even start? Because it'd be great if we did that today on the live show to help people understand, okay, well, this is maybe a first step I need to take before I can even listen to what she has to say today.
Yeah. So one of the things that we start out with is I do a fun exercise where I have people, chime in the chat, or, if we're doing it in person, to write it on their little dry erase board that I give them. What's the first word you think of when I say the word conflict? And inevitably, I get a bunch of negative words. Everything has a negative connotation. I said, well, there you go. The way that you think about a given topic, be it conflict, will directly correlate with how you approach it, right? So the first thing I help them understand is the fact that it is inevitable. So we talk about all the things that amplify the likelihood of conflict erupting. Interdependency. If my role is dependent on your role, but you're not doing your role, and suddenly it's coming to me, and I'm already starting with a product, say it's a manufacturing industry, for example. I'm starting with a product that's already subpar, and I'm expected to then continue my part in making that. That right there, there's some resentfulness kind of sitting in. Stuff like that. Even in the healthcare sector, if I'm not filling up my cart at the end of my shift, at shift changeover, and that you're starting your cart depleted, then you've already established that the max level of customer service or patient care you're going to be able to provide that day is very, kind of baseline, because you're going to be stuck having to complete the job of the other. So interdependency, we talk about a bunch of different things that even we're conflicted with ourselves sometimes, right? My mind says one thing, my heart says another. Well, seriously, if you're able to encounter conflict within yourself, the minute that you multiply two perspectives, two, priorities where they focus their energy on their at work and what they're trying to achieve, right? It's going to happen. It's going to erupt at one point or another. So to help them really reframe it, to say, okay, well, if it is inevitable, how can we manage it? What do we need to be able to have, conversations that are a bit more courageous? How can we prepare for that? And so we start by, once we've established and reframed it, and I have them write a definition they're not allowed to use any negative words in their definition of conflict. So then we share that and we draft this really collective definition where, okay, here you go. This is what conflict is. We hear things of like, there's potential for innovation and finding different ways of doing things from these different perspectives, and being able to strengthen our team, just the collaboration within the team, because there's that level of trust that comes from being able to have respectful dialogue, right? Even though we have differing opinions. So we explore that, we reframe it. Now that we've reframed it, it means that we're going to approach it. Here are some tools to prepare for it and to make sure that, you're running in like anything. If you're trying to deal with something or take a trip and you haven't packed half of the stuff that you needed, then it's going to be a really crappy, excuse my language, trip, compared to if you've taken the time to prepare and think about it and you're coming into it, with that full toolkit. So really to make sure that you're adding to your toolkit and you're having those conversations in a way that you can kind of draw on whatever tool you need to manage and navigate that specific conflict at that time.
Right, because conflict, as we said, will happen. It's a part of life. And what's interesting too is we're hearing that the perception of conflict has become more broad spectrum. For example, if you have a differing approach than I do, That's now become a contentious situation in some instances. Now, some people are like, what's going on? Well, okay, maybe we've forgotten we've gone through a pandemic and they're still working through a lot of that. And I don't know if you've ever heard of disaster fatigue, but it's a real thing. And we're still dealing with that. So we're also had this exhaustion from dealing with, and it's still experiencing a lot of uncertainty in our lives, our world, our economic structures, etc. That puts a steady state of stress on us, because if you were to think, your ability to cope with life, if you will, is this cup. Well, you're already here. So anything else may be perceived as a threat, particularly if you're in what we call fight, flight, or freeze. So if you're in that survival mode, you're a little bit more anxious than normal, a little bit more stressed than normal, then chances are even a different opinion or a different approach may be a quote unquote threat to you, because you're at a heightened sense of threat.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're there mentally, like you say, because of the pandemic, but just in general, if you have consistently chosen not to address conflict because it's just uncomfortable, you're sweeping it under the rug. I think every choice ensues a consequence, and choosing not to address a conflict also has a consequence. And I think there's this kind of accumulation of resentment and frustrations that are there, be them, maybe you're not even aware of them, which is fine. You're not aware of them, but it might actually, we've all had experiences where, well, maybe not you, but me personally, I've, lost it because someone didn't put the cover on the peanut butter jar. But it wasn't really about the cover of the peanut butter jar, right? It was about an accumulation of other things that upset me, but that I didn't address, because I was like, pick your battles, right? Pick your battles, choose your battles. But
and then it just starts building up.
And then so now add like a global pandemic and the stresses that came from that, and that disaster fatigue. You're already working at this very low energy state. Then obviously you're not going to be able to manage as easily, or you're going to be much more apt to fly off the handle for the littlest thing. One of the things I like to teach during my workshops, and even when I'm doing conflict resolution and mediation, is to help people move away from their position, because the position is the what they want. I want this. I need this. Be it perceived needs and desires or real, right? Sometimes I think this is what I want, but I actually want something completely different, right? Move away from the what to the interest, that underlying interest, the why. Help, and through curious questioning with this other person, as you're navigating that more, that more courageous conversation or that conflict, help me understand your perspective, Erin. Like, you're coming at it like this, I'm coming at it like this. Help me understand why you see it that way and why that's important to you. And once you start to dig in the why, often there's actual commonality between the whys. And that's what mediators do. They help uncover that commonality, and then you start from there to build resolution, long-lasting resolution, right?
Well, it's very interesting too, the work I do a lot with my clients. We're talking about different types of work styles, because that leads to a lot of perceived conflict.
Yes.
Just how Bob and Sally do work, approach things, communicate is very, very different. Their priorities are different. How they approach things are different. So the perception is very different, but they could want the very same thing. How they're approaching it is very, very different. So they're in conflict, as I call it, violently agreeing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have a story on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. It was, a long-term care facility. Mm-hmm. Here's the context. 2 wings, right? That's the way they operated. There were, 4 staff per wing, and they were partnered. So 2 and 2. And they needed to get all the residents to the dining hall every morning for 8 a.m. for breakfast. So I'm doing this conflict analysis. I interviewed 72 individuals to figure out, why is there this ongoing and resurfacing conflict all the time? There's this toxicity, and we're doing this deep dive analysis. And I was trying to stay as neutral as possible. So I would just ask, I don't want your name, I want your role, and I want how long you've been with the organization, because some, it provides further insight into, maybe it's their onboarding that's the issue, the training, or is it because, there's been a bit of it has to do with one specific role. It's not actually the entire organization. Right. Okay. One person comes in, she gives me her role, and she says, my biggest issue is my partner. It's hell. Like, I come in and I'm trying to like wake the patient, the resident up, and I'm saying, good morning. How are you? How did you sleep last night? I have not even said like good morning, and off come the blankets and off come the clothes. And this poor resident is being just ship and put everything together so that we can get them out to the dining room. She has no humanity. It's crazy. It's just, she's so, by the book and so time driven. And I'm like, oh, I know. Okay. No, I'm not saying I know. Actually, I'm like, okay, I understand that. So stay like that. 4 people later, the one person comes in and says, oh, my biggest issue is my partner. So right away, first red flag. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know who this person's partner is. And then she says, I tell you, she likes to waste so much time with conversation and how did you sleep? And it's like she'd spend an hour if I'd let her. We'd be late every morning to get our 9 residents out to there. Well, I knew exactly who it was, right? And I said, so further down the line, after we did all our conflict analysis, there was identification that we need to establish kind of these rules of conduct between these 2 individuals because there's ongoing conflict with them. So I was brought in to mediate between them and explained, short of, you're very task oriented and you want to get people out there, you want the results, speaking to your personality style from earlier, right? The DISC styles. And you're very people oriented and you feel the need to nurture that people need, that relationship building need, which seems to be hindering the other person and vice versa. Let's put that aside. What is your ultimate goal here? What is it that you want to, your non-negotiable goal every day? And they both said quality patient care. I said, quality patient care. And they both said, we're here to offer their home in their final, years on earth. I want that to be a high quality. Okay, well, what might that high quality experience look like? We start with that and we get them sitting side by side, not face to face, not oppositional, sitting side by side, facing a flip chart. And I start to, okay, let's talk about what would a quality patient care, years home life feel like? And we describe it. Okay, what is that? What our current state is as you're working with your residents? No. What needs to change? What needs to go? And what do we need to see more of? And then we come up with that resolution, right? So that when we move them away from the fact that they were treating things differently, but ultimately helping them uncover what are we both here trying to achieve, and starting from there, game changing, right? Absolutely. It was really an interesting experience. And it was one that I've used often in different contexts to be able to drive home the point that it's okay to have different ways, but let's figure out how we can work together to get that quality patient care. And maybe that means that I limit my chit chat to, 5 minutes when I come in, and then you don't actually do anything until I'm done checking in. Maybe you're not comfortable doing the chit chat, which is fine, but maybe you do other things in the room while I'm having that with the patient, and then we get them started. And once they understood that, apparently there's been a disappearance of conflict between those 2 ever since. And that was several years ago.
That's great. Yeah, getting them focused on a commonality and a common goal. And I feel too, teaching people to fish, understanding that yes, there are different personalities out there. I mean, true story for me, as a young professional, I was a very fixed-minded person. No clue. There are other people that were different than me, thought differently. I thought, well, I don't understand why people don't always do it this way. That's just crazy. People are just nuts. They're blah, blah, blah. So I spent a lot of time being pissed off and upset over things that I really did not need to be upset about.
Yeah.
So it was a lack of understanding. And I remember one client specifically, she was ready to quit, and she worked for a high power technology company. Great job. She was ready to quit because she just did not get along with her boss. And her boss, she was convinced, thought she was an anchor dragger and slow and not very smart. Because he was very much of a driver. What's next person? Give me the answers now. What's the urgency? She needs to think about things, marinate over things, look at the detail, and make sure she makes the right decisions. So they were at odds because she wasn't exhibiting urgency, and he needed that urgency. She was just, from appearances, very laid back, not really worried. That was just her style. It wasn't that she didn't have a sense of urgency. It was just simply her style. Yeah, it's so interesting. Once I helped her understand that, no, he's not an egotistical, narcissistic maniac. He just wants to know that something's going to move forward, things changed. It all changed overnight.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. And to reframe some of that behavior often, right?
Mhm.
To chalk it up to they're not just being a jerk or they're not just, asking me a bunch of questions, questioning my competency. It's actually because I'm not presenting the information in a way that they're wired to receive information. So
Right.
we're staying stuck in the processing state as opposed to, or phase, as opposed to moving past that and being able to then, okay, I see where you're going with this, right? So it's
Mhm.
your job as a communicator, period, to confirm understanding, to confirm uptake, right? You want to listen curiously, but then also when okay, does that make any sense? Is this how you see it? These are questions that help kind of make sure that you're confirming that understanding and you're helping the other one, that in your case, right? As a young professional, well, that client of yours, maybe ask them flat out, like, okay, I'm sensing that there's like a sense of urgency around here, but I would like to spend some time analyzing, but also crafting kind of a bit of a buy-in pitch with that. I want to do that analysis to avoid the rework, that costly rework, and to avoid some mistakes, right? So, what would be a reasonable amount of time that you could provide me to get that done? But then I'll also commit to moving forward and getting this ball rolling, right?
Right.
Meeting
I'll
each
just
other.
share with you though, Lori-Ann, what I'm seeing is a majority of individuals who I would say conflict is the most gripping,
Okay.
has the most level of significance.
Mhm.
Those individuals that I mean, that was a fantastic pitch. That came very naturally, flowed very easily. Chances are conflict is not a challenge for you. There are some people where it really locks them down. So, what can they do to prep in advance? One, we talked about, reframing conflict. Conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. And yes, it is inevitable. And we see more of it just because of how we're now wired a little bit differently, what our threat per level is, that sort of thing. And our definition of what a threat might be also has a lot to do with it.
Absolutely.
Yes. And, what can we do to prep these individuals that in the moment, when conflict lands on you, or something that might be a little tense, a tense situation, you need to show up 100% for this because this needs to be something managed very well. This might be a struggle. What can we do to help them?
I think it's about bringing self-awareness to how they tend to react in conflict and
Mhm.
understand, it's like anything. The more you understand your blind spots in conflict, the more you understand where you're apt to go from those destructive kind of responses in conflict. The more you can actually transform those destructive responses into productive ones, right? Anytime you encounter a conflict situation, there's inevitable mind chatter going on, right? There's stuff going on in your brain, and that's part of your fight or flight survival mode, right? You're protecting yourself, and so if you're coming in and you're wearing me down with logic, I'm going to say, oh my God, she's just trying to overpower me again. Here we go again, right? This is what's going on in the back of my head. But when I'm thinking about that, obviously, then how am I going to overpower her? Then, right? I'm going into this
Mhm.
defense mode. So you need to interrupt that chatter. You need to interrupt that automatic thought that's happening regardless. And you need to reframe that thought. So instead of thinking she's trying to overpower me again with logic, you say, wow, she's coming at this from a completely different angle. Or I don't know if she realizes how aggressively she's coming across.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
you've interrupted it and reframed it in that more constructive light, the more likely you are to adopt a more productive behavior in that moment, in that conflict moment.
That's really good. So pre-programming yourself, if you will,
Absolutely.
what it might be for you, and
Yeah.
just becoming very aware of your own innate roadblocks in those situations.
Re-examine,
Yeah.
re-examine some of the past conflicts,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Situation, and then replay them and say, okay, what was likely going on in my mind at that time? What was I
Right.
thinking in that moment? What was I thinking?
Yeah, or maybe I was frozen. Maybe I
Yeah.
was frozen. That happens quite a bit. Now, Daryl mentions I found the book Crucial Conversations helpful in this regard. And yes, that's a very good book. It's a very good recommended
Mm,
book, Daryl. And I think also, understanding self tremendously because we all have triggers,
we
right?
do.
In fact, I was triggered personally. Yes, I'm a coach and I'm still working on me. Of course, I was triggered recently through some conflict, that it's a small community, and in small communities, sometimes you have a few people that may not be quite nice. And when I set my boundaries and said no to something I was volunteered for because I have no bandwidth at the moment,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
and they did not appreciate it because it did went against their agenda. So now they're trying to make my life very difficult for me. So it was very triggering. So I said, okay, what about this is triggering and why? And linking it back to, okay, in my childhood, I found myself ostracized because I looked very different. I was the tallest girl in my class. In fact, I was the tallest person at my school until I was in junior high, and all the guys came back from summer camp, 2 feet tall. So kids can be quite cruel. So, I was ostracized. So I was like, okay, this is very triggering for me because this happened in my childhood. Now, how can I manage this?
Yeah.
Right. And understanding that there's some deeper conditioning and programming that could be getting in your way too.
100%.
Now, this is not therapy, and it is also about understanding self. So it's a component of that self-awareness that you mentioned, Lori, about understanding self at a deeper level and knowing, okay, what are my triggers? And maybe you're not linking it to childhood, but at least being aware of,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
I'm in this situation, I know I'm going to freeze. If someone says something a certain way or demands something a certain way, I may act this way or that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And if you freeze in that moment, to recognize that it's okay to freeze in the moment and to say, and to realize that it means you're in no state to continue this conversation. And so it's okay to pause it to say, hey, I understand what's going on, that you're really upset. And I really I definitely think we need to talk this out. Let's set a time. Because right now, obviously, maybe it's too heated, and that happens whether you freeze or sometimes just emotions get too amplified in that moment, and it's not a great time. You want to have that kind of quiet mind to some extent to have that conversation more comfortably. I like what you were saying about that awareness, that self-awareness piece. I call them filters, right? That we filter these mental models, that we filter every situation in life through. And part of those past disappointments, maybe in the past when I encountered you and I tried to have a respectful conversation, you flew off the handle and you freaked out and you were really mean with me. So the next time I need to come back and bring something up that was frustrating, I'm more likely to just either sweep it under the rug, which again, back to my point earlier, that there's a consequence nonetheless, then have that conversation. So you need to be aware of those past disappointments and how they may actually be impacting and prescribing the way that you're dealing with this situation, right? And to move past them. Once you're aware of them, then you're able to move past them. Hot buttons, for me personally, whining, 0 to 60. You can tell me in a very calm, collected voice, I can't find my jacket, Mom. And I'll be like, okay, let's figure this out, blah, 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 right?
But it's a little different when they go, Mom.
I'm already starting that conversation from, right? So being aware of those hot buttons as well, that those triggers, as you alluded to, be them, deep rooted in childhood, or just things that irk you. Eye rolling's another one, right? If you're aware of them, then you know that when it happens, you say, hey, you're being triggered, just move past it. So if you're having that conversation with the person in the past that tend to eye roll the whole time, move past it, because you're like, this is what is it I tell my daughter? Sounds like an issue, not an ish me. With certain things, like that's their issue, not yours to carry. So move past it so that you can continue to have that conversation. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those people who put off the difficult conversation, and we've all been guilty. We've had one we need to make, and we're putting it off because who likes conflict? Most people don't. And it's normal.
Thank you. People say, well, it's just because I'm uncomfortable with it. Oh, okay. Newsflash. Everybody is. Nobody craves conflict. Some people crave drama. We've all seen those types of personalities. Okay. But the conflict piece isn't something they crave. They crave just the excitement and the drama the excitement that the drama brings. The conflict piece, not so much.
No, not really. No. So you're normal. Congratulations. If that's you out there tuning in an hour later, if conflict is not fun for you, guess what? It's not for anybody. So welcome to humanity. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But we have these situations, we know we need to have them. We
Mhm.
know we need to have it. What holds us back? Typically, it's fear. Fear of being judged, fear of things not going right,
Absolutely.
fear of an escalation, fear of reprisal, etc.
Yeah.
We don't want any of that. So how can we prepare ourselves to have these difficult conversations, particularly, in the workplace? Leaders
Mhm.
need to be very familiar with or required to have difficult conversations
Mhm.
sometimes. You have
Mhm.
an underperformer or someone who is causing conflict. This needs to be brought up. So what do we do?
You bring your toolkit. What's in that toolkit? Some key sentences that'll move a conversation along that will help diffuse conversations, right? For leaders, seriously, when the other person is getting like really heated or very defensive, I encourage to look for a pen and say, I really want to be able to capture everything that you're saying. So just give me a second to find a pen, and purposely don't find that pen. Not right away. Give them time to breathe, because
Mhm.
often if you give them just a minute to breathe, then they're likely going to have time to just kind of diffuse, and then they're going to be better. They'll be
Right.
able to have that
Right.
conversation, right?
Yeah. Gerald mentioned here, by working on this conflict, can become a positive. And it can be neutral as opposed to a negative. And that's where we're working for in the situation, is getting it more to a neutral state. You're having
Yeah.
a conversation. It doesn't need to be.
It's about neutralizing. That's why I
Mhm.
get work as a mediator. I come in as that neutral third party, right? When the organization has deemed that no, there's no way that we're going to be able to resolve this internally. There's going to be these perceptions if management does it, so then they bring me in. But it's about neutralizing that situation. It's about making it attacking the problem, not the person, and
Mhm.
recognizing we're here to attack, and reminding the employees that we're here to attack the problem, not the person. For managers, it's about helping them have that conversation as opposed to you interjecting and becoming an arbitrator in the situation. Tell me your side, you're right, you're wrong. No, right? No, it's about, let's have this conversation. Let's think about what we have in common. What's our ultimate goal here? And what
Mhm.
needs to happen to get us there? What needs
And
to stop
taking
for us to get there?
Yeah, and taking the blame out of the situation, setting up the conversation very clearly from the get-go. I've noticed, I'm curious to know. This
Yes.
has been observed, not
Help me
you
understand.
did or you didn't do it. You take the word you out of it, throw it away. Word choice is extremely powerful in these types of
100%.
situations. It's been noticed,
Yes.
observed.
Yeah, have those key little sentences on your desk so that you can glance down at them and just kind of
Mhm.
have them as a safety net if you feel like bogged down in a situation, right? Or it's I don't know where to go from here. Look at those. Move that along. Move
Mhm.
that conversation along
Or
with those.
even practice it with a friend or in the
Yeah,
mirror sometimes. That helps
absolutely.
tremendously for those of us who need to process, need to develop a script, need to kind of know what we are going to say ahead of time because the tension gets very high. And
Yeah.
also somatically, so looking at the body, how can we manage our neuro system, our nervous system, to do more nervous system regulation in advance, you know, not hyperventilating or anything like that, doing deep
Making sure
breathing.
you're not hungry, you're not tired, you're not,
Exactly.
getting into all of that so that you're not coming into that conversation already, as I call it, hangry. You're coming in with, kind of a level head. Consider your environment. Round tables, I love them. Round
Yes.
tables as opposed to face to face. Face to face for me transmits opposition, transmits, it's me against you. Make it a round table, or even better, sit, in a more casual setting. If the
Sit off to one side instead of directly facing one another in the animal kingdom. Oh, hey, guess what? We're animals. Yeah, I know. Shock.
Yeah.
In the animal kingdom, being a face to face, particularly for men, is confrontational. So to avoid anything like that, you want to be, you know, to the side, not directly head on.
Exactly.
That helps lower significance.
Neutralize. Absolutely. Encourage it regular. Encourage debate as a leader in your team. Purposely plant debate and help them hone those skills of
Yes.
navigating that dialogue and being able to, voice your opinion and support your opinion with evidence, and to have the other person respect that it's okay. There's more than one way to think about this, and that's okay. We're okay with that. Normalize debate and encourage it regularly in order for people to stop being terrified of that conflict, that uncomfortable conversation, right?
Right. And also having space and grace for people who don't necessarily have the right word choice, and being more cognizant of making the right word choices when you are presenting ideas, instead of we need to, or we must, or you should.
No,
this is what I thought would be a good idea. What are your thoughts? And this is my perspective on something. So instead of being a declaration of this is how it is, which
that's the what.
I'm really good at that, by the way.
Yeah. And then and then moving towards the I statements. Yeah, absolutely. That this is how I see it. This is how I perceive this. And remaining open, like working on your open mind to receive. When they say two minds are better than one, do you really think they presuppose that both people were coming at it from the same angle? No, it speaks to the beauty of differing perspectives, right? And how it provides a more comprehensive solution.
Absolutely. Yeah. Different perspectives are so valuable. And that's one reason why we're seeking. I mean, if everybody was made the same, we'd never get any innovation. We just wouldn't have that beautiful complexity. So it is so important to lean into that versus shunning it. So a difference of opinion isn't necessarily a threat.
No.
It's a different perspective that can be very valuable and beautiful. And being openly curious, acknowledging, okay, I feel like I'm threatened. Let me set that aside. And can I be openly curious and non-judgmental in the moment? I'm practicing ahead of time. So you're absolutely right. For leaders who can do that, foster open discussion and debate, as you mentioned, debating a topic, learning how to do that in advance.
Yeah.
So, Lori, any other golden nuggets that you'd like to share with us as we're thinking about, conflict management, whether it be in teams, whether it be for the individuals?
Just in general, that owning your conversations. I think it's really important for leaders not to take it all upon themselves to become, the conflict managers within their organization, but rather to return that onus and that the ownership of just conflict in general and those more courageous conversations to every one of your team members, understanding how they're likely to react in conflict, and then helping build up their skill set to be able to navigate that conflict and those more courageous conversations. I was explaining my example of lately I've seen a trend where they bring us in, they'll bring me in for developing shared commitments, right? There's this ongoing conflict, and post-pandemic kind of an opportunity to do a bit of a culture reset. And part and parcel of that culture reset is to develop some shared commitments. How are we going to navigate the new world of work as a team moving forward? Where is it we want to focus our energy? And what do we want to see more of versus what we want to see less of? So I was explaining before the show with you that we do these exercises where everybody gets like a plethora of Post-it notes, and they need to write down every behavior that they've observed over the past 5 years that they feel is not conducive to collaboration and to a great team environment. So they write and they go crazy. I collect them all because it's completely anonymous, and then I transcribe them. They start to see trends, right? So any leader could do this kind of an exercise with their teams to highlight all of these things that we've observed, and then we group them into themes. Okay, well, obviously we're seeing a bit of some intimidation happening. We're seeing, exclusionary kind of exclusion practices, such as, not really pinpointing people or talking about people when they're not there, or not inviting everyone to a social work function, or vice versa. Right?
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. We're seeing this. Okay, now how can we transform all of this, kind of unwanted behavior into some shared commitments to make sure it never happens again? So what do we want to see more of, and what does that look like? So we usually come up with 10 commitments of, we want to own our interactions. So if someone upsets you or does something that you don't agree with, you commit to going to see them within the day. You don't give yourself 24 hours necessarily. I'm not saying not to digest, but you can go see them and say, hey, we need to have a chat. If it's not a good time today, I'm okay with that. But when could we meet? Right. So at least to take that first step, to rip that Band-Aid off, per se, and to say, we're going to have this conversation, and then you can take your time to prepare. Even if it's not a good time for you, say, not quite, today doesn't work for me, but I'd like for us to meet tomorrow and have a chat, right? Maybe, and to have that conversation. It was funny, some of the stuff that came out, using our inside voice when communicating with colleagues, because apparently yelling was the norm in this organization. In 2023, surprisingly. So using our inside voice and being respectful and professional in all our interactions. Now there's a great shared commitment, right? Holding each other accountable for our work. So understanding that if I ask you, where's this thing that was, I was supposed to get before a certain time, then it's not me telling you you're incompetent. It's just me holding you accountable to your commitments that we've both committed
agreed on, right?
Yeah,
it's really interesting you mentioned some of these, and we're still dealing with this. One of my clients, who's a VP of HR, she's like, I cannot believe what we're dealing with in the workplace right now. She's like, it's insane. It's like high school level behavior. She goes, I had these people lost their minds. They forget how to behave when we were isolated. It's like, well, there's multiple levels of things going on. One of them is the fact that, well, over isolation, isolation does have a significant impact on the brain and body. One of those is a decrease in emotional intelligence. Now, this is not permanent. The good news is you can get it back.
Yeah, it's coming back.
It's a muscle you got to practice again. Developing that emotional intelligence again, being more cognizant around social norms. What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? And maybe having that be a little bit more obvious. In your case, Lori, it sounds you're creating those agreements in the culture again. Like, this is the behavior we want to promote. And this is how we handle when it's not in alignment with that.
Exactly. It gives you a reference point, right? It gives you something to go back to. One of the interesting things that happened a few weeks ago, we were doing this exercise, and one person said, well, what if I freeze? Sometimes I want to tell that person that, that's not cool, but I'm not able to vocalize it. So they came up with a sign. I thought that was so interesting. They came up with a sign, and this means, I'm sorry that words are the way. So just this, all you have to do is this, and there's no room for further debate. Part of that, I don't care if that was intentional or not. This is how I'm perceiving it, that it goes against our shared commitments.
Right.
So when you see that, you stop and move on from that conversation. Whatever's happening there, you stop and you move on. I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of help those who might feel a bit more intimidated by calling people out, per se, or holding them accountable. It was just like a more subtle way to do it. And then the other person has to accept that, no, this isn't up for debate. Even though it wasn't intentional, this is how it's being received. So let's move on from here.
Right. It's being perceived as a threat. And that person is now frozen. And they can't think. I mean, it's really interesting as people are like, well, others just do this. It's like, well, when the human brain perceives it's under threat, the cognitive function gets shut down.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking is not really something one is necessarily capable of doing very well. That's not where the energy is going. The energy is going to fight, flight, or freeze. Like, what do? I'm being attacked. What do I do? So it's a very primal thing.
Yeah.
So it takes the energy away from our lovely, beautiful Homo sapien brain that enables us to logic, think, and see patterns, They lost access to that. So keeping in mind, that is a very important thing. Like, hey, timeout. I need space.
Yeah, I need space, and making that okay to kind of
absolutely
put that sign out there.
That's great.
There was one last thing that I thought of as you were talking about organization, what they're contending with. Oh, to help people understand at which point are they an active participant in conflict. So that's a big one in workplaces, right? They think that, if I'm going to use Gerald because he's there. Sorry, Gerald, you're in our chat, so I'm going to use your name. So if Gerald comes to me, something's happened between Gerald and I. And rather than come to me directly, Gerald goes to Erin and says, Erin, I want to tell you about a situation that transpired with Lori. And so explains the situation. But the moment that Erin doesn't say, hey, Have you had a chat with her? Have you told her how that how you're seeing that? Have you talked to her about it? The moment that Erin doesn't say, how can I support you in having that conversation, but rather says, well, you should see what she did to me last week. Or even if she doesn't say anything at all, you're still an active participant. And that is what I refer to as triangulation, right? Gerald is going to you kind of under the guise that, oh, I'm just going to vet this through a second pair of eyes, when in fact what he is doing is rallying the troops, right? And corralling his people. And so sometimes maybe even after if he hasn't gotten the reaction from Erin that he was looking for, and I'm not saying, Gerald, by all means that you're like this, I'm just using your name as an example. If you go to then, we'll go to Julia and say, hey, Julia, got to tell you, I'm just telling Erin about this, but I want to tell you about it because I want to make sure that I'm interpreting this right? Mm-hmm. Again, Julia needs to be saying, have you talked to Lori about it? That's the game changer.
And back to, you need to have that.
If they're not comfortable having that conversation, ask them what you can do to support them in having that conversation. And maybe it's practicing, like you referenced earlier, right? Let's practice it with me, and then you can go and have it with them.
Right. Absolutely. It's really interesting when I'm chatting with some of my clients, and they cite workplace toxicity. It's very toxic. Okay. And when we start peeling back the layers of the onions, how many times that the discussion, the open dialogue, is not promoted by leadership.
Yeah.
And it's avoidance, conflict avoidance is promoted by leadership. And what, as a result, a direct result of that, as I've seen, is a toxic workplace. Because there's all this festering tension and strife and emotional baggage that doesn't need to be there, that is there, that's getting in the way of people being positive, productive, purposeful, and in the workplace, and collaborating at the optimal level. And that's what I see oftentimes.
Yeah. Why do you think that leaders avoid it, though? Why do they avoid having the conflict? Why do they, I guess, promote that conflict avoidance?
Because they themselves are not equipped. They don't know. They don't have the tools. They've never seen Lori.
They've never seen me. You're right. And often, even I've got a template like conflict resolution agreement, which really is only, let's document what we've just agreed to. That this is our rules of navigating our working relationship. Like, you've never even seen something like that. They're like, well, I've been able to sometimes have those conversations between employees and facilitate media. Anyone can have the conversation, but have them both sign. It brings that level of commitment that this is 100% what we've agreed to.
And individuals can use it too. Well, let's just say that you work in a workplace and your leadership maybe either has been trained, as a cognizant, or maybe don't have the tools available to them, whatever the challenge is. You, the individual, also has the power. A lot of people think that they don't, and you absolutely do. You can bring that type of tool into the workplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. You do have the power. In fact, we have so much more impact than we recognize. And before we sign off, I do definitely want to get any last tidbits from you. And I also just want to point out really quickly that while we're still catching up a little bit, and we're starting to see that things turn to the betterment as far as leadership development and training and that sort of thing, there's still a huge gap with that. Organizations have put training and talent development on the back burner for the last 15 years or more. And it's definitely created some problems. So I'm glad to see that that's starting to change.
It is shifting. And it's so exciting to see that people are wanting to invest. I mean, I think the why they've suddenly decided to reinvest in talent development and in just the workplace culture and the employee experience they're offering is irrelevant, right? Be it the pandemic, be it the fact that it's a job seekers market. I think the fact that they're embracing the importance of creating that healthier workplace, that healthier kind of employee experience that makes people, motivates them, and they're seeing the value of really investing in that engagement, that motivation, and saying, you know what, how do you need us to show up for you? And they're starting from there is beautiful. So I'm really happy. And I'm always excited to work with organizations who have that mindset. But I'll be honest, I've got organizations who come to me and, they say, convince me as to why I need you. Right there. Sorry, I don't think
Well, that's the first problem.
There, like,
Yeah.
I want to work with organizations who get it. They're okay.
Mhm.
Obviously, we can't keep doing what we're doing because it's not working. So we got to do something different. Let's work together to see what kind of something different we can craft. Absolutely.
Right.
I see.
Well, Lori, yeah, Tonya Cordy just chimed in. She said, referencing something we chatted about a minute ago, asking people, how do you feel? What do you need is a great way to get the conversation focused and clear instead of, you know, getting it too emotionally
I
involved.
agree. I absolutely agree, Tanya.
Yeah. And acknowledging the person, like, I see you.
I see you. Yeah.
I see you. I hear you. I understand that you're very upset right now, or it seems like you're upset. And sometimes we can miscall that. That's why we want to say seems like, and not just say.
That's the confirmation piece, right? Hey, I'm sensing that you're really frustrated right now. Is that accurate? Like, that's that confirmation of assumptions. Check those assumptions. But also, often they just want to be seen or heard, right? There's certain styles. Last we talked about the disc and everything, the different styles. And sometimes there are styles that their biggest kind of trigger is feeling like they're not heard.
Yes.
Often just listening and actively listening and showing that you're actually interestingly, you're listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond. Game changing.
It is truly game changing. All right, I feel like we could talk probably for another couple hours. I know we don't have that kind of time because you have some meetings this afternoon, and I do as well. But it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Is there any last comments you'd like to share with us before we wrap up today?
Not really, other than, if people want to connect, I'm always open to broadening my network. So I am on LinkedIn, and they're welcome to visit the website at www.thepeopleperson.ca. And finally, if they wanted to just check out my YouTube channel, The People Powered Approach, they'll see a number of videos, and one of which I talk about conflict as well. So just additional tips and tidbits. And by this summer, I will have a book out helping people really map and giving them kind of an instruction manual on what drives motivation, but then what can you do about it? Here's a roadmap, and you can start to actually change and impact within your organization within, a matter of days of reading the book.
Yeah, so definitely follow her and be tuned in to that book. That book is so needed right now. So I'm really excited for you. And again, great to have you on the show. For all of you tuning either in now live or watching the replay later, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, reach out to either one of us. And we'd love to see you. And as always, my friends, keep elevating. Bye for now.